Welcome back to Flick Recap. Today, I will tell you about a movie called Knock Knock, released in 2016. Let's begin.
Fine, we celebrated this one. Inside.
The car can wait.
No! No! No!
Evan and Karen are a happily married couple living in California with their 2 children. While Evan is an architect, Karen is a sculptor preparing for a major exhibition. One morning, as they enjoy breakfast together, Karen's assistant, Louis, arrives with catalogs for the upcoming show. The family shares a light-hearted moment, and Evan reminds his kids about their trip to the beach with their mother over the weekend. Later on, Karen walks Louis through the key pieces of her exhibition, mentioning that one sculpture is still drying. So, Louis assures her he will return later to pick it up. As Karen and the children pack for their trip, she reminds Evan that his physical therapist, Vivian, will visit the next day. The kids beg him to come along, but Evan explains that he has work to finish up at home. Later that night, as a storm rages outside, Evan sits at his computer, completely immersed in his work while listening to music. His phone rings as Karen calls to say they already miss him. After the call, Evan returns to his 3D architectural models, working late into the night. Suddenly, a knock at the front door disrupts his focus. When he opens it, he finds 2 young women standing in the rain, looking lost. They claim to be searching for someone Evan doesn't recognize. Reluctantly, he lets them inside to use his computer for directions. He hands them towels while they search on his iPad, but when he returns, the girls are no longer where he left them. One of them, a blonde named Belle, introduces herself, while the other, Genesis, explains that they mistakenly gave their cab driver the wrong street name, leaving them stranded far from their destination. Evan manages to book a ride for them, though the estimated wait time is 45 minutes. The girls exchange a quick glance before asking if they could toss their wet clothes into the dryer so they do not arrive at their party soaking wet. Evan agrees and even asks for their phones so he could place it in a bowl of rice to help dry it. While waiting, he prepares tea for them in the kitchen. As he returns from putting their clothes in the dryer, he hears music playing from his turntable and the sound of laughter. He walks in to find the girls dancing to the music. They complimented Evan's extensive vinyl collection. So he tells them that he used to be a DJ in his 20s, which surprises them. When they ask about his age, Evan says he is 43, and the girls compliment him, saying he looks much younger. Evan also mentions that he married young and that his wife and kids are currently away on a trip he was supposed to join. The girls express sympathy for him being left home alone and suddenly embrace him in a playful hug. Genesis then begins touching his muscles and teasingly comments on how fit he is for his age. Feeling slightly uncomfortable, Evan tries to steer the conversation in another direction. Then, Belle notices a picture of his wife and remarks that he is lucky. This puts Evan more at ease, and he begins talking freely about Karen and her artwork. Belle seems impressed when she learns that all the sculptures in the house are Karen's. Genesis tells him that she had studied art history for a brief time in school. So Evan went ahead to show them a catalog of Karen's upcoming art show in Los Angeles. Both girls admire Karen's talent and refer to the couple as an artistic power duo. Their admiration, however, takes a personal turn as they start asking questions about Evan and Karen's marriage. The topic makes Evan a bit uneasy. He admits that he is not used to such candid discussions about relationships, prompting the girls to tease him about sounding older than he looks. As he tries to change the subject, Genesis asks how long he has been married. He tells her it has been many years, and this leads to a more probing question. They asked if he had only ever been with Karen. Evan responds that he has remained faithful, as that is how love should be. However, the girls challenge this notion and they argue against monogamy and human nature. Their words seem to briefly make Evan reflect. So, Belle puts in her own perspective, stating that she expects her future husband will want to be with other women, and to avoid infidelity, she plans to engage in threesomes with him. Evan becomes increasingly uncomfortable and attempts to divert the conversation once more by asking about their professions. Genesis tells him they are both flight attendants, and they begin playfully role-playing their roles as airline staff. Evan laughs nervously and moves to another seat, asking which airline they work for. The conversation shifts to travel, with Belle passionately stating that exploring the world is the best way to gain life experience. Soon, however, the topic veers back to relationships, as they gossip about their coworkers and eventually falls back to discussing intimacy. Evan, now visibly uneasy, anxiously checks the ride app again. Genesis then asks where the bathroom is, and as she heads there, Belle browses through his vinyl records. She selects one and asks Evan to play it. As he puts it on, he tells her about the artist, and she listens with interest. Inspired, she begins dancing, which reignites Evan's old DJ instincts. He picks another record to seamlessly blend into the track, showcasing his skills on the deck. This made Belle delighted and she praised his talent. As she continues, Belle tells Evan that she is glad they happened to knock on his door, claiming that they are having a much better time with him than they would have had at the party they initially planned to attend. Evan then tells Belle that his home is rarely as lively as it is with them there. In the end, Belle concludes that fate had brought them together and convinces him to dance with her. She flirts and attempts to kiss him just as the Uber arrives. Evan was grateful for the distraction and asked Belle to fetch Genesis while Evan gathered their clothes. Evan waits for the girls to come out, but when they don't, he checks the bathroom and hears them laughing inside. As he enters to hand them their clothes, he is shocked to find them completely naked. They tease him, calling it a surprise. At first, he resists, reminding them that their ride is waiting, but when Genesis kisses him and both women start touching him, his hesitation completely shatters. Meanwhile, the Uber driver, after receiving no response to his calls, drives away. In the end, Evan eventually succumbs to the temptation, engaging in an intimate encounter with them in the bathtub and later in his bed. Exhausted, he falls asleep between the two girls. The next morning, he wakes up alone and quickly grabs his phone to reply to a text from Karen. Realizing what he's done, he hurriedly puts his wedding ring back on, gets dressed, and checks the house. Assuming the girls have left, he begins to relax, until he hears laughter coming from the kitchen. When he walks in, he finds them making a mess, with Genesis cooking pancakes and offering him some. Irritated by their carefree attitude, he bluntly asks if he can drive them home. But instead of cooperating, they laugh at him, making him realize that getting rid of them won't be as simple as he thought. Just then his phone rings. It's Karen. Stepping outside to take the call, he tells her that he smoked too much weed and passed out last night. Karen jokes about him being a lightweight before updating him on the kids. But as they talk, the girls sneak up behind him, pressing their faces against the glass door and teasing him. Panicking, he quickly moves to block them from Karen's view. To change the subject, he mentions his work project, pretending to be deeply focused. However, the girls continue messing with him, making it hard for him to concentrate. Sensing his distraction, Karen tells him she'll call back later. Totally frustrated, Evan storms inside and yells at them to get dressed, but they only giggle and run off. He chases after them but finds only Genesis waiting in another room. Before he can react, Belle suddenly appears in his closet, wearing his shirt and asking him to hold her. She throws herself at him as she dramatically declares her love. Pushing her away, Evan drags her back to Genesis, giving them 3 minutes to get dressed to leave. Stepping outside for a cigarette, he tries to gather his thoughts before returning inside. But when he does, he's met with an even bigger problem. The girls are defacing one of Karen's sculptures, painting over it with markers. Enraged, he shoves Genesis away from the artwork and snatches the marker from Belle's hands, demanding to know if they realize what they've done. But they only smile, saying they were inspired by last night. Overcome with fury, Evan finally snaps and threatens to call the police. However, Genesis warns him against it and they eventually reveal that they are underage. Belle claims to be 15. Although Evan is skeptical, Genesis insists that the jury will believe otherwise and refers to it as statutory rape. Belle then taunts him further, saying she has proof if he chooses to call the police. Confused and shocked by the turn of events, Evan recalls their claim about being flight attendants and was convinced that they were lying. But Genesis tells him that they got the story from a movie and that they had lied about their job. Now fully panicked, Evan asks how much money they want to make the problem go away. But the two become offended by his words and they scold him for assuming they were hookers. Belle slaps him, insisting she is not a prostitute. Just then the doorbell rings. In a bid to hide the situation, Evan tells them to stay put while he answers it. At the door, he finds his physical therapist, Vivian. She begins chatting, but Evan quickly tells her that he is feeling much better and no longer needs therapy. Vivian continues speaking until Genesis appears, telling her that Evan no longer wants her massage. Embarrassed and upset, Vivian confronts Evan, reminding him that she loves his wife. Though he tries to explain, she walks away, saying she knows exactly what is happening. Returning inside, Evan finds the girls messing with his expensive turntable. Frustrated once more, he shoves Belle away and attempts to force them out of the house. However, they continue to taunt him and as Genesis provokes him relentlessly, Evan's anger boils over, and he grabs her by the throat. Belle, frightened, picks up a sculpture, ready to defend her friend. However, Genesis was unfazed and she continued teasing him. Then realizing his mistake, Evan releases her and frantically calls the police to report a break-in. Before he can complete the call, Genesis disconnects it and asks him to give them a ride back to town. They eventually get into the car and Evan drives them to another suburb. As Belle exits the car, she playfully invites Evan to come in and meet her mother. However, after Evan drove off, neither she nor Genesis entered the house. Evan soon returns home and immediately starts cleaning. He tidies up the kitchen and bathroom before attempting to restore his wife's sculpture. That night, he takes a tablet, believing that the ordeal is finally over and he has escaped safe and sound. He had just resumed working on his project when he suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking in another part of the house. He stood and walked over to investigate the disturbance, but he found nothing. However, when he enters the living room, he discovers a broken family photo on the ground. As he crouches down to pick it up, Genesis strikes him over the head with one of Karen's sculptures. Moments later, Evan wakes up tied to a bed, watching Genesis apply makeup while humming a tune. He starts to plead with her to release him, insisting that he is a good person who simply made a mistake, but she ignores him. Suddenly, Belle enters the room wearing Evan's daughter's clothes, including her underwear. Horrified, Evan demands that she take them off, calling her insane. Belle mockingly removes the underwear and throws it at him, dancing around while taunting that every girl's first love is her father. This made Evan call her sick, but she continues her disturbing games. As he begs for freedom, Belle climbs on top of him as she continues to talk and reveals deep-seated issues from her childhood. Meanwhile, Genesis writes, "It was not a dream" on the mirror. Belle then begins hitting Evan, seemingly confusing him with her father. Just then, Evan's phone rings. It was Karen who was on FaceTime. The girls quickly prepare to answer the call and threaten to expose him. Panicking, Evan promises to do whatever Belle wants if they don't answer. Satisfied by this, Belle jumps on him while Genesis records the moment before leaving the room. Desperate, Evan manages to break free from his restraints and pushes Belle to the floor. He then rushes after Genesis, only to find her casually eating cake. When he grabs her by the neck, she stabs him in the shoulder with a fork, twisting it into his injury to pin him down. Belle soon arrives and declares that Evan must be punished for hitting her. However, Evan was overwhelmed by the pain from his shoulder and he lost consciousness. This allows the girls to tie him up again. They turn his torment into a twisted game show, with Genesis acting as the host and Belle as a contestant. They placed headphones on Evan's ears, and when he annoys them, Genesis blasts loud noises through his turntable, and this gives him unbearable pain. When he cries out that he might go deaf, she finally stops. The game continues, and although Evan tries to cooperate, Genesis keeps manipulating him with threats and noise torture. Just as Evan struggles with another question, the doorbell rings. It was Lewis who was there to pick up the sculpture. The girls quickly cover Evan to keep Lewis from seeing him and wheel him into another room. In the end, Genesis answers the door and she tells Lewis that Evan is her uncle and they are filming a music video in the house. As Lewis moves to collect the sculpture, he notices something is wrong. When he uncovers the artwork, he sees that the artwork has been badly defaced. The two girls try to convince him that someone broke in and that Evan is chasing them, but Lewis doesn't buy their story. When Genesis attempts to flirt with him, Lewis eventually sees through their lies. He soon hears Evan making muffled sounds and Lewis rushes to find him. He eventually finds Evan tied and he tries to free him. But before he can finish, he hears the girls breaking the sculpture. Distracted by this, Lewis hurries over to stop them. But the girls teased him until he eventually had an asthma attack. Panicked, he reaches for his inhaler, only to find that the girls have stolen it. Laughing and teasing him further, the two toss it around, keeping it away from his reach. Evan begs them to give it back to Lewis, but they ignore his pleas. As he struggles to breathe, Lewis loses his balance and hits his head against the base of the sculpture and passes out. The girls burst into laughter, ignoring Evan's desperate cries to call for an ambulance. Evan then frantically accuses them of killing Lewis, but Genesis coldly responds that it was his wife's terrible sculpture that killed him. As Evan watches in horror, the girls proceed to cover Lewis's lifeless body with paper, transforming him into a distorted sculpture of their own creation. Meanwhile, Evan attempts to reach for his gun as Genesis sends a threatening message to Lewis from Evan's phone. It was to show as evidence why Evans killed Louise. The girls then stash Lewis's body in his van before returning to continue their twisted game show with Evan. Despite their taunts, Evan insists he is a good father, arguing that his actions with the girls do not define his love for his family. Genesis, however, calls his family the true victims of his perversion, while Belle spits on a family photo, claiming that is what he did to them by sleeping with her and Genesis. Evan finally realizes that their plan is to kill him and he starts to desperately plead for his life, blaming the girls for initiating everything. However, Genesis coldly informs him that he will be executed at dawn and advises him not to waste his final hours crying. Belle, showing a twinge of regret, apologizes to him and tells him that there is no other way. Later that night, the girls dig a shallow grave in the backyard before heading back inside. Meanwhile, Evan struggles with his restraints, managing to reach his tablet in a desperate attempt to call Karen. But before he can do anything, Genesis snatches it away, crushing any hope of escape. They rummage through his closet, trying on his clothes, then move on to vandalizing Karen's sculptures and architectural models. As if that wasn't enough, they take things further by giving him a humiliating bowl cut before continuing their destruction, smashing and defacing more of Karen's artwork. During their chaotic rampage, they stumble upon Evan's gun. Seizing the opportunity for more sadistic fun, Belle unties him, and Evan, now cautious of their every move, demands to know what they want. Genesis grins and declares they're going to play hide and seek. If Evan manages to evade them until sunrise, they'll leave. He gets a 30-second head start before the hunt begins. Without wasting a second, Evan sprints to the kitchen, grabbing a knife for defense. As the countdown ends, the girls gleefully search for him, their laughter echoing through the house. He manages to slip past them, but just as he thinks he has a chance to escape, Genesis catches up, taunting him mercilessly. When he screams for help, she laughs at him as he reminds him that no one will hear, there's no one around to save him. By dawn, Evan is completely overpowered. The girls roll him into the freshly dug grave, leaving only his head exposed. He pleads for his life, desperate for mercy. Genesis removes his gag and offers him a deal. If he calls his wife and confesses everything, they'll let him go. With no other choice, Evan agrees, but when Genesis dials Karen's phone, it goes straight to voicemail. Realizing this might be his only chance, he starts screaming for help, but Genesis, already anticipating his trick, hangs up before the message records. Smiling, Genesis lifts a heavy sculpture over Evan's head as she gets ready to crush him. At the last second, she drops it beside him, laughing as he flinches in terror. Belle then informs him that it was all just a game. Before leaving, they reveal the truth. They aren't underage, and Evan isn't their first victim. They've done this to many men before him, and they'll keep doing it until they meet a father who can resist them. As their final humiliation, Belle uploads a video of their night together onto Evan's Facebook page. Then, leaving the phone in front of him, they walk away. Still trapped, Evan frantically tries to delete the video before anyone sees it. But in his panic, he accidentally hits like instead. The next day, when his family returns, they find their home in ruins, the aftermath of a nightmare Evan never saw coming. And that wraps up the recap of Knock Knock, the 2015 horror crime thriller. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more movie recaps. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next recap.